Thanks everyone. Thanks all the speakers so far. Really interesting and engaging day so far. So this is session 3, meaning and demeaning, or meaning and demeaning, which will, I guess the speakers will determine which is more appropriate. So without further ado, the first presenter is Desislava Stoeva, from St. John's University, USA, and the title of the paper is Panopticist Effects of Using Satellite Imagery for Supervision in Agriculture. So over to you, Desislava.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. Let me know if you can see my screen okay and hear me well. Good. Thank you. So my name is Desi Stoeva, and I'm part of St. John's University's multi-sector communication PhD program. My dissertation explores the use of satellite imagery for supervision as part of the European Union Common Agricultural Policy Program in Bulgaria, or CAP for short. There we have seen remote supervision replacing almost entirely traditional supervision checks. And it is my big pleasure to be sharing with you today a small part of my work, which looks at how the increased use of satellites for supervision has brought about some new dimensions of personal experience and of meaning. So to start with, something we see very often today with the rapid modernization of different spheres is accelerated digitalization for efficiency's sake. Labor-intensive or time-consuming manual steps are substituted with technological solutions that were built to extract the same information faster. However, since no two methods are alike, this direct substitution without adjustment to each system's features can lead to misunderstandings, tensions, and gray areas. And this is exactly what I study in my dissertation as well. I look at how the application of satellite technology in CAP has systematically increased the power of the macro structure using it. In this case, this is the European Union and the Ministry of Agriculture in Bulgaria, while weakening that of the microstructure or individual farmers. And although my findings are closely connected to Eastern Europe, where I'm from, the work also uncovered some fundamental connections to the field of media ecology that I'm excited to talk about today with you. But firstly, I'll start with a brief overview of what the panopticon is for anyone who's not familiar and draw a distinction between these two concepts. So in the late 1700s, English philosopher Jeremy Bentham described and developed in detail an idea that his brother Samuel Bentham had. He envisioned a revolutionary type of penitentiary house called a panopticon, or central inspection principle. This circular facility allowed for a smaller number of inspectors to supervise everyone confined inside it at any time they wanted. The guards were stationed in a separate section higher than the cells so they could observe everyone inside while they themselves remained hidden. And that the compliance component in this system was established through the feeling the prisoners had that they might be watched at all times, even if they weren't. And that way they behaved. It transcended the physical constructs of space and introduced a new dimension of psychological control. In a column for The Guardian in 1996, John Ryle recounted his own experience exploring the Panopticon prison on the Isle of Youth in Cuba, which is what you're seeing in the photo in the background. He climbed the observation tower to the right, you can see it, and was able to see from the perspective of the supervisors. And even as a visitor, he admitted that there was a transformative feeling to such intense observation of power. After Bentham's work, a number of scholars were curious about the implications of the panopticon outside his primarily practical views on the advantages of the model, and one of those scholars was Michel Foucault. Fast forward now to 1975, Foucault dug deeper into the meaning of Bentham's panopticon in his work Discipline and Punish. He argued that the panopticon prison was not just the building design, but I quote, figure of political technology that may and must be detached from any specific use. Now, according to him, this type of methodology could be applied for any situation in which a large group of people had to behave according to set rules. And he synthesized the sociological implications from the panopticon prison into a model and concept of control and discipline and power administration, which he called Panopticism. Satellites today could be seen as a modern version of Bentham's Panopticon. They're invisible to the human eye, yet orbit the Earth, providing on-demand supervision of various human-centered processes. In particular, the modern satellite can be equated to the observational power in the original panopticon structure, while the superintendents who were situated at the tower are similar to the governments and organizations that rely on the stream of satellite imagery to conduct surveillance of various subjects and processes. And in my research, I found that the use of satellite imagery for agricultural supervision closely mirrored panopticism. The adherence of the farmers to the set rules of CAP were verified through assessments at random, which could happen either in person or through remote supervision. But in the latter case, farmers were not aware of when and how that check took place, just like in the Panopticon present. Now, among the early media scholars to question the effects that satellites had on people's perception of their role within society was Marshall McLuhan. In books, essays, and interviews, he discussed the technology and how it brought an unprecedented shift that made people more aware of their interferences with nature. In a 1974 essay, fittingly titled with his thesis on the matter, at the moment of Sputnik, the planet became a global theater in which there are no spectators but only actors, McLuhan described the monumental paradigm shift that came from realizing that the Earth and its inhabitants were being observed from afar, placing it in an unprecedented, quote, man-made container. This invited a rethinking of the way people related to their surroundings and promoted a pronounced return to ecological thinking. This type of attitude towards the surrounding world was defined by people's goal to establish an equilibrium in their environment, as opposed to seeing it as something outside of their existence and reach. He also noted that with the fast speed of information delivery enabled by satellites, meaning could often come following the experience itself. And in the case of CAB, this dynamic transpires in the difference in perception experienced from the moment a farmer maintains the parcels, which is the event itself, to the moment the macrostructure assesses the parcel with satellite imagery to determine if it adheres to the guidelines of the program, which is the recognition. Some of McLuhan's most famous views on the interferences of a medium were captured in his book Understanding Media from 1964. Of interest to this study is the author's exploration of what might occur when a new technology is pushed too far or swiftly introduced into an environment that has previously operated on different frequency. In the chapter, Reversal of the Overheated Medium, McLuhan warned about how the transition from a mechanical process to an instant one could lead to what he referred to as an implosion. When modern technology was added into traditional administrative processes based on a unidirectional organizational structure, it caused immense disruptions. And a similar thing is happening within CAP with the introduction of satellite imagery to traditional assurance processes. This resulting structure is just not able to accurately handle objections, dispute resolution, and everything else coming from the use of satellite imagery because it was never created with this assessment system in mind. And to truly understand a new medium of communication, like satellites, people need to look beyond binary concepts like advantages and disadvantages. And for this, we can apply the tetrad as media effect. It's a set of 4 distinct questions which could be used to understand the way every technology alters our environment, described by Marshall McLuhan and Eric McLuhan in Laws of Media, the New Science from 1992. It helps us uncover what the technology enhances, what it makes obsolete, what it retrieves back from the past, or reverses into when pushed to its limits. And this is a satellite tetrad. Every new technology provides an element of enhancement. As we can see, for satellites, it is the way they allow people to capture the planet from afar, which was not possible before their invention. And from a practical standpoint, the satellite has also provided an extension of the human eye, allowing people to obtain visual information from a vast expanses of land from a standpoint that the human is just not capable of reaching. Understanding the retrieval aspect and the obsolescence aspect of the satellite is possible when we look at the essay I mentioned earlier at the moment of Sputnik. More specifically, McLuhan explained how satellite observation introduced ecology as a replacement of nature, which promoted an active relationship between a person and their surrounding environment where they sought to sustain it constantly. He further indicated that ecological ways of thinking were typical for pre-literate tribes, so the introduction of ecology then could be seen as a retrieval from a previous time. When it comes to the reversal aspect of satellites, the implosion can be seen as the instantaneousness that satellites introduce. This type of accelerated flow of information made the lag between observation and information so small that people were starting to become more aware of the consequences of their own action as participants in the environment. So, in my analysis of 67 court decision documents dating from 2016 to 2023, I was able to conclude that my initial hypothesis was partially supported. There was evidence to suggest that satellite imagery was used in a panopticist way and was taking away some of the power of individual farmers. So I'll share some of my more interesting findings that relate to this topic. First and foremost, it's the fact that the macrostructure has full control over the method and timing of supervision activities. The fact that satellite imagery checks are the default in the system, and they're used for the majority of applicants, except for 2 to 5% of parcels designated for in-person checks, or if a region was not covered in the remote imagery map. Also, the fact that the map is not updated regularly enough is another issue, and there are cases in which farmers are judged on the basis of remote imagery, even if the map for that region is not current. This produces a sort of flawed panopticon model, which is even more problematic than the original panopticon, because a diligent farmer might be penalized based on an assessment made through outdated information. So, all in all, those are some key observations from my research work that show how the use of satellite imagery for observation has the capacity to make this process more panopticist if it's not better regulated. And my hope with everything I've researched is that I'll be able to lay the foundations for more just use of the technology, and that future findings on this topic that maybe build upon the models will be able to help governments see that a successful application of this technology is important and how it could actually look like, making the experience of farmers less prison-like and more participatory. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share my findings with you.
Great, thank you very much, Desislava. So our next presentation is entitled Broken Humans and Obsolete Culture, analysing two bluffs of technophilic discourse, and it's by Marcelo Capello Martins from Pontifical Catholic University, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So over to you, Marcelo.
Thank you, Dom. I'll just share my screen real quick. Can you all see it? All right. Let me fix this. All right. So it's a pleasure to be here, guys, with so many faces that I haven't seen in a while, and also some that I'm just getting to know right now. I hope we can have a good exchange of ideas, and thank you for having me. I am hailing from Brazil right now, and I'm a PhD student of philosophy, and I'm also a high school teacher. I teach philosophy here in Brazil. And so the many aspects of my presentation, I kind of have to deal with them in the classroom. So my presentation today is about a specific chapter of my ongoing PhD dissertation. At the moment, the title of this dissertation is Technological Obesity, Criticizing Technophilia with the Works of Jacques Ellul. And it might be subject to change yet. But the whole idea of technological obesity came after reading an analogy by Neil Postman in his book, The End of Education. He says that technology is like food in the sense that we can't live without it, but we need to have a healthy relation with it. And as I believe many will agree, we are currently living in times of technological obesity in the sense that we just can't put limits to technology's presence in our daily lives. So the main goal of the research is to categorize and criticize discourses and kinds of talk that are way too much pro-technology, ignoring the problems behind this obesity. So the set of discourses, of talks that suggest we fully embrace technology like this are what I'm calling technophilic discourses, and very inspired by Elu, what I'm calling as bluffs. Today, I would like to talk about two specific bluffs that inspire the title of this presentation, Broken Humans and Obsolete Culture. All right. So first, what do I mean in a larger scope by technophilia? This word that in general terms is based on the Greek words techne and philos, so our love of technology. I am referring to a kind of domination that we submit to once we give ourselves to the discourses that I mentioned. In the screen right now is the structure of the second chapter of my work. And before heading to the bluffs, I'd like to talk a little bit about this definition of technophilia as a form of domination. I am basing myself here in the works of Spinoza, the modern philosopher who died in 1677. So he really wasn't talking about technology, but he was talking about politics. However, in his political treatise, he describes 4 ways in which you can be under the control, under the dominion of another person. And that's what interests me in his work. He says that you are under the dominion of another person if you are deprived of control of your own body by another person. So if you are physically held by someone. I won't get into that now, but the fact that sometimes we can't turn our faces from our cell phones kind of resembles this description, but I won't get into that. Second, if you are deprived of means of escape or defense, maybe you are not totally tied up by another person, but you are put in a position that you can't get out. These two are ways to physically dominate another person. Now let's see what really interests us, the ways you can be mentally dominated. First, you can be mentally dominated if you fear the powers of another person. So this is the case of a people that fears the power of the tyrant. This is the kind of example that Spinoza was thinking. But what really, really interests us is the last kind of domination that happens when you submit yourself to the devices of another person, of someone else, for an apparent benefit. That's where it puts technophilia. This is when you accept to blindly follow the will of someone else because it seems like you will have bigger benefits from it, as opposed to what would happen if you followed your own reasoning, your own will. So you are taken by the affection of hope. You believe that the future will be better if you have hope in the promises of someone else. For me, technophilia happens when we fall for the discourses that promise benefits from the technological advancements, and we fully embrace them without posing any questions. So do we delegate too much to technology? Do we believe that technology will provide all the solutions we need? Do we prefer to follow the path of technological advancements without considering other perspectives? If you say yes to all of this means that society, in a lot of ways, is putting all hope in the hands of technological inventions, technological solutions, and utopian futures. What I want to do in this chapter of my work is to describe different kinds of talks, discourses about technology that promote this kind of domination. Like Elu Wood, I think, I call these discourses as bluffs here, based on his book, The Technological Bluff. I discuss 7 different bluffs and give names to them. The names themselves are not necessarily based on Elu's work, as the case of the bluff of solutionism, which is a word that Elu never uses. The idea of this chapter is to take Elu as the starting point for a broader dialogue with many other philosophers and authors that can contribute to the discussion and expand his ideas concerning how much the world has changed since the last century. So the bluffs are the bluff of solutionism, of humanism, of aristocracy, of scientific salvation, of authority, of the technical culture, and of human freedom. Today, I will talk only about two of them, the bluff of humanism and the bluff of the technical culture, as I believe they are more related to the interest of the Institute of General Semantics. When it comes to humanism, I am indeed taking the words of Elu as the basis. He says that all techno-discourse either is or seeks to be discourse about humanity, about human primacy and objectives. So therefore, the more technocratic the author, the more technophile he is, the higher the rating of humanity, the more he talks about human progress. So in order to make the pill of technology easier to swallow, technophiles generally talk about human progress and how the development of their tools will make our lives better. In the end, it is all a talk about how humans are totally in control and will totally benefit from technology. We can see that in the way Silicon Valley giants talk about the human condition, the whole point generally being about developing a new device or product that can make humans function better. The contemporary philosopher Evgeny Morozov writes about that in his book, To Save Everything, Click Here. He gives us some good examples of this broken humanity mindset and some of the so-called solutions. He says that all these attempts to fix the human condition, to reduce our biases by quantifying everything, to circumvent the frailties of our memory by recording everything, to rid us of our lowly provincial interests by getting technology companies to serve us a more nutritious information diet, to get us to do the right thing by turning everything in life into a game, so gamification in a nutshell. These are indicative of Silicon Valley's unease with imperfection, as well as its glorification of the powerful tools at its disposal. We should be asking certain questions about that. Are we even broken in the first place? And if we keep enhancing ourselves, at what point do we stop being human? If all this is for the well-being of us humans, then what does it mean to be human in the first place? So if technophiles always talk about how we can be better and way more enhanced humans, then what exactly do they consider human? Isn't the point of transhumanism to transcend humanity? This point gets very hot when you look at the works of the technological guru Ray Kurzweil and his passion for achieving the singularity. The same goes for many transhumanists and futurists out there. It talks about the merger of our biological thinking and existence with our technology, the point in time where there will be no distinction between human and machine, physical reality and virtual reality. That would be the singularity. And he wonders what will remain unequivocally human in such a world. And he says that what will remain human in us is this quality. Ours is the species that inherently seeks to extend its physical and mental reach beyond current limitations. I find the idea that we inherently want to extend ourselves indefinitely quite debatable. In what level is he affirming that? Do all cultures share this human characteristic and in the same degree? And also there's a fallacy here. He defines the human being as the one species that tries to be something else, something better. His desires and technical mindset are inserted into his definition. And in a much more concerning way, we should ask if we are going to let the technologists of this world dictate what does it mean to be human. Are we going to let the guy who says empathy is what is wrong with civilization dictate to us what does it mean to be human? I believe you know who I'm talking about. I won't go so deep into this futuristic landscape, but I would like to talk a little bit about AI, since the large language models have been the hottest topic in the field and especially in the educational sphere, where we are still learning how to deal with it. We must wonder how it will also shape our culture, how it is already doing it. Here we get into the bluff of the technical culture, which I will address briefly. Elu asks if there's a possibility that a technical culture comes to life in his book, The Technological Bluff. Similarly, Neil Postman discusses the rendition of culture to technology in his classic book, Technophilic. What I want to discuss in the time left is how this path to a technologically mediated culture affects our communication. And I believe that the words of Hannah Arendt are very insightful. She writes that if we would follow the advice to adjust our cultural attitudes to the present status of scientific achievements, we would in all earnest adopt a way of life in which speech is no longer meaningful. I would add that if our speech is obsolete, then our understanding of the world goes away with it. She is describing the fact that scientific language is way ahead of natural language, to the fact that we can no longer talk about in a comprehensive way about the things that we are technologically doing. Just think about how hard it is to explain the many actions of the large language models and how they work to our students. I'm sure many of you talk about it with your students as well as I do with mine. Elu too has some insights about it. He writes that whether we like it or not, for technique, all language is algebraic. And of course, he says, culture has to rest on the specificity of a language. Otherwise, communication between people will be destroyed and no culture can be created. He is like Arendt, pointing to the difficulty to conciliate mathematical computerized language with our daily speech, the latter being responsible for giving meaning to a culture. What truly worries me is the fact that large language models talk to us, engage in conversations with us in natural language, but they are heavily based on the most complex stochastic calculations possible. So, in other words, they function based on quantitative terms. So I ask if it's a special virtue of school and education as a whole to stimulate the students' creativity and skillful use of language, then what happens if every single assignment or research that they do is by going to the ChatGPT first? We learn by doing, so we learn to write, having as a reference the things we hear and read. If all they do is read what the LLMs show them as an output, then aren't we homogenizing writing? We should be asking ourselves then, how are the large language models affecting our way to communicate? And if culture implies a set of knowledge, then we will reduce our epistemic skill to just writing the best prompts. Will we stop educating potential poets and philosophers and just limit ourselves to educate the best prompt engineers? If we give in to the technical mindset and criteria, then there won't be much left for us to do. AI will do for us, because in quantitative terms, they are far beyond our human capacity. Or maybe we will turn ourselves into machines, fixing our broken human condition. But this is a future I'm not sure I would like to participate in. So these are just some of my ideas for my dissertation, and I hope you share them with me, as I believe it is our duty as intellectuals to discuss what's concerning about this world. And I'm eager to hear what you have to say about it. So thank you for having me once again.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Very stimulating. So our third presenter has the title Unmappable Differences, Analogies Between Culture and Nature. And the presenter is Fabiola Ballarati Chechetto. And apologies, Fabiola, if I've pronounced that terribly wrong. And from the Pontifical Catholic University, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Don. Can you hear me well? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Don. And I'm glad to see dear people like my pragmatist friend, Bob Innes, and my first reference in media ecology, Adriana Braga, and my all-time favorite writer and musician, Paul Levinson, as well as meeting new thinkers. So I'm so glad. Thank you. Let me share my screen. Every time I do that wrong, but I will try to do my best. Okay. Okay, can you see that? All right. So The research I will present today is called Unmappable Differences, Analogies between Nature and Culture, and revisits a fragment from my doctoral dissertation. Let me change this, okay. Change, right. Last year, I defended my PhD in communication and semiotics at the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo in Brazil with my dear mentor, a very wise epistemologist of communication, to whom I thank for the teachings and dialogues. She's a Professor Lucrecia D'Alessio Ferrara, and the title of our doctoral dissertations posed two questions: translating differences, cartographing without maps. Well, the first one asks, is it possible to translate differences in an interconnected but globalized world? The second is at once a doubt, a suggestion, and a risky proposal. Do we need to stick solely to models in order to know? And the cases studied were three groups of women: the South Korea Haenyeo fisher women from the island of Jeju, the indigenous Brazilian Yanomami crafts women from the village of Maturacá in the Amazon, and the Italian scientists from biorobotics from the cities of Pisa and Genova. Let's quickly take a look at some images of the media coverage in these three groups. So Korea fisher women dive up to 50 meters deep without any equipment, most of them between 65 and 92 years old, in search of seafood for survival. It is a tradition cultivated for more than 400 years and was recognized as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity by UNESCO in 2016. Okay. Let's see them, the museum, the fashion advertising about them, the beautiful landscapes. The Brazilian Yanomami artisans find and remove from the forest floor a shiny black thread similar to a vine used to decorate their baskets, which they discovered was actually a new species of fungus, previously unknown to science. Let's see the Yanomami women, the forest, Amazon, photos from the photographer called Andujar. And the Italian scientist of biorobotics soft designed robots inspired by the shapes of nature and have created a new concept in robots, soft robots. These robots are made from lightweight, soft and malleable materials, simulating the fluid movement of living beings such as octopuses, rays, plants, and vines, in search of a new sensoriality, allowing the prototypes to move in deep temperatures, useful for monitoring the environment, medicine, and the exploration of other planets. Okay, let's see. Cecilia Lasky and Barbara Mazzolai, laboratory. Da Vinci Draw, about biomimetics, and the Pandora's box that I talked about. Well, the research is divided into 4 chapters. In the last chapter, we realized that differences are not mappable in the way we initially imagined, but that translation as a cultural constant is subject to various communicative, media, and cognitive desynchronies. But in order to deepen the analogical and allegorical dimension of these asymmetries, we must once again touch on the question of the difference between map and territory. The famous aphorism, a map is not the territory, formulated by the polymath Alfred Korzybski, who, as everyone here already knows, developed the general semantic theory remind us that representations of the word are not the word, just as words, the name, things, and beliefs that generalize allegories both fail to capture and translate all the complexity and concreteness of the flows of reality. The map territory analysis that Korzybski suggests compel us to observe more specific implications that, at the interface of language and symbolic communication, meaning and perception, epistemology and evaluation, touch on the problem of translation and communication. Now, the way Korzybski articulates the map territory analogy through the empirical example of geographical map is in correspondence or not to the territory it symbolizes is marked by the question, very important question, of similarity, which leads to correspondence or not to a structure. The similar is then privileged to deduce that language and reality have similar reasons, but by saying that a map is not a territory, raises suspicions that the relationship that map territory can establish, since they are distinct, may not only be a relationship of similarity or dissimilarity. For our part, in the translations of the cases from the three cultures, the map is shown to be equivalent to territory, and its effects follow this logic. However, the asymmetries between media similarity and everyday experience has made it clear that, in reality, both map and territory can be indexes, and the difference lies both in the map, which is foreign to the territory, and in the territory itself, which constantly changes its maps. In the way structure, as a theory, methodology, belief, can no longer be sustained as an analogical parameter. Why? Because the map territory analogy cannot be grasped through fixed identity. Translatability through the analogy of differences indicates a technical map as a word, no longer as a mediative, and indicates territory as an empirical way to mapping, without a previous drawing, because it is traced where? In the experiences. The unpredictability of experience affects and retranslates the difference between the old functions of map representing and territory represented. In other words, the script of culture traces roots between similarities, dissimilarities, and deviations from territories through maps, while interactions in the enjoyment of the world discover and or invent a possible cartography of unmappable differences. In this research, drift is seen as a movement that translations make with the similar and dissimilar of the media, escaping communications with differences, and the drift that translatability can make by working with chance, necessity, and intentionality. Remember the avant-garde spirit of the Situationist International? Do you remember then? SE? The drift of translatability, which we should formulate, learns to learn from the media drift and takes advantage of it to make a kind of drift of the drift, this time creating and meeting the differences and not avoiding them. This translating power of culture domesticates, masters the continuous and entropic flow of communicative experience of nature and culture, seeking to stabilize and dominate the multitudinous, monstrous, technical, poetic, and unpredictable force of encounters with difference. At last, I invite you to reflect on a few questions. Not a few, but many questions. Would it be possible to think about reactions to maps and territories if we left behind the translation and interpretations of differences that can't be mapped? Could we dare to navigate through the rope inventions, abductive hypotheses, fictions, and imaginations? Is it possible to create a science and a sanity that might be analogous to the art of reality, even with all its insane drifts? Maybe we can still hear the melodies of non-Aristotelian intuition for a productive exchange of new information. How can we update the questions of general semantics in our time in a way that is sensitive to the unpredictable nature of contact with otherness? If communication between cultures is always uncertain and irreversible, can we try to listen to a polyphony of constantly changing meanings? It's a real life trying to figure out which difference would really make a difference. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabiola. Some wonderful visuals throughout that presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're in good time, and our next presenter needs no introduction. So the title of his paper is about attention, and it's over to you, Lance.
Thanks, Dom. And I'll just mention that this is taken from a piece I'm working on for OSM and Ryan McCullough. I'll get you something, folks, I promise. And I don't have a PowerPoint because this just came up less than 24 hours ago, but here goes. Attention is the fundamental prerequisite for education. The first lesson, whether it takes place in kindergarten, nursery school, daycare center, or directly from a parent or caregiver, is the simple admonishment to pay attention. In formal schooling, students typically are required to attend classes, and us instructors have been known to take attendance. And it all begins really with showing up. And for the most part, with sitting still, which is something that's unnatural for very young children and for more than a few adults, it seems. Stillness is the prerequisite for being attentive, whether attention is directed outward towards the environment and others or inward in the form of reflection and meditation. Stillness and quiet allow us to open the doors of perception, to survey the interior landscape of our own consciousness. And learning requires openness to take in what is new. It requires a degree of effort and risk, which in turn are the price we pay for growth. Too little openness, and we have resistance to change, rejection of anything that does not conform to what we already know, and refusal to grow. Too much openness, however, and we experience overload, leading to shutdown and closure. We need to find a happy medium that allows us to absorb and process information and ideas in a measured, manageable fashion. The most important lessons that we can learn is learning itself, learning how to learn, which Gregory Bateson called deutero learning. Now, inspired by Marshall McLuhan, Neil Postman introduced media ecology as a field of inquiry. And at first, he echoed McLuhan in calling for schools to adapt themselves to the electronic media environment. And this comes up most notably in his co-authored work, Teaching as a Subversive Activity. But Postman came to see the amusements being offered by television in particular as inimical to rational detachment. And 6 years before delivering the prescient warning that Americans are amusing ourselves to death, Postman returned to the subject of education in 1979 with a reversal of his previous position 10 years earlier, and published his book, Teaching as a Conserving Activity. And just as McLuhan back in 51 in his book, The Mechanical Bride, made reference to ads and entertainment as commercial education, Postman argued that television is a de facto rival of the school, that the school is a medium comparable to television, and that as far as television and the school are concerned, each one of them is a curriculum. He defined curriculum as a, quote, specially constructed information system whose purpose in its totality is to influence, teach, train, or cultivate the mind and character of our youth. And Postman went on to conclude, a quote here, by this definition, television and school not only have curriculums, but are curriculums. That is, they are total learning systems. So how then does the television curriculum differ from the school curriculum? First and foremost, Postman points to the relationship between attention and content. As he explains, and I'll quote here again, unlike the school, which selects its subject matter first and then tries to devise methods to attract interest in it, television first selects ways to attract interest, allowing content to be shaped accordingly. This is not to say that the content of the school curriculum is always significant, or that the content of television is always trivial, only that in the first instance, attention is subservient to content, and in the second, content is wholly subservient to attention. In the school curriculum, if the student repeatedly does not pay attention, the teacher may remove him from class. In the TV curriculum, if the student repeatedly does not pay attention, the teacher is removed from class. So Postman therefore characterizes the television curriculum as attention-centered. He did this before the term attention deficit disorder was introduced in 1980, and significantly before the 21st century concerns regarding the attention economy and attention as a commodity. Postman's analysis of television as a medium is based on the broader analysis of the electronic media in general, which is why it can be applied to later technological innovations, such as the internet and web, social media, and mobile devices. Postman's term attention-centered is just as applicable, if not more so, to digital media, the gadgets and the apps that have come to dominate the lives of adults and children alike. And I think it important to emphasize that Postman's contrast between attention and content does not constitute a two-valued orientation. They're not being presented as binary oppositions to one another. Both television and the schools are concerned with content and attention alike. Rather, it's a question of priority and proportion. The school, as a medium associated with literacy and print, begins with specific learning objectives, be it the basic acquisition of reading and writing skills, or the memorization of texts, or the mastery of various forms of critical analysis. For this reason, content is king, no matter how much thought and effort is put into teaching methods and attempts to capture the attention and imagination of students. The written word, and by extension typography, is by nature linear and sequential, as for example, letter follows letter, word follows word, sentence follows sentence, page follows page, etc. As a curriculum in its own right, writing and print teach us to think and express ourselves in lines and sequences of ideas and arguments, to follow progressive paths of learning, moving from one step to the next. These media do not strictly enforce a level of logic and coherence in our discourse, but they strongly encourage it. They strongly encourage such forms of organization. Television, on the other hand, does not. As an electronic medium capable of instantaneous communication, it favors immediacy and rapid turnover of content, which all but guarantees incoherence. As a visual medium, it favors images that elicit feelings and emotions that have a direct, visceral impact on the viewer. With relatively few barriers to access, relatively little skill needed to decode its messages, television and the electronic media do not require gradual acquisition of knowledge in a step-by-step manner. no grading, no grades, or no graduations, just an unending stream of stimulation. Moreover, as a largely commercial medium, television and other electronic media have an added incentive to place a premium on attention, on attracting and maintaining audiences to be offered up to sale for the highest bidder. This form of commercial education is all about the eyeballs, as the folks in the industry put it, all about getting viewers to tune in, making sure they don't touch that dial and change the channel. And nowadays, it's all about the streaming and the doom scrolling. Postman's prescription then is to let schools do what they do best, to work with the bias of the medium and not try to compete with the electronic media by making their content more entertaining, and to understand that what has been termed educational television is an oxymoron, at least in regard to traditional learning objectives of schools. But there's also a more expansive argument to be made here, as the attention-centered curriculum of television has effects that go far beyond education to every aspect of society. In politics, television emphasizes the appearance and personality of candidates and officials over debate and dialogue regarding issues and ideologies. In journalism, image too becomes the priority, and entertainment comes to dominate over information, image over substance, or as the saying goes regarding the priorities of TV news, if it bleeds, it leads. And in religion, the spotlight shifts from God to the preacher or clergy, from admonitions to amusements, from sermons to song and dance, and from the sacred and the moral to the profane and commercial. In this way, Postman's argument about television versus the school evolved into his analysis of the transition from typographic to televisual culture that appears in Amusing Ourselves to Death. In my own follow-up entitled Amazing Ourselves to Death, my finding is that this has not diminished, but rather intensified, first via the expansion of television via cable and satellite, and then through the addition of the internet, the web, social media, and mobile devices. Now, the irony here is that our attention-centered media, in constantly competing with one another, vying for our attention, ultimately contributes to the decline in our ability to attend to their content. You might say that in making attention their currency, they undermine our ability to actually pay attention. Let me then suggest a set of related terms, 5 terms for us to consider in conjunction with Postman's concept of being attention-centered. First, stimulation. Attention is a response to stimulation, and the problem with stimulation is that its effectiveness declines over time. With repetition, we become numb to it. That's what McLuhan called narcissus narcosis. This, in turn, requires a continuing intensification of stimulation to maintain its effects. And that ultimately leads to overstimulation that includes sensory overload and information overload, which has negative effects on us cognitively and emotionally, eventually leads to complete shutdown. In this sense, attention-centered media are self-defeating. Second term, distraction. To compete for attention is to engage in constant distraction from others who are also competing for that same attention. In this way, we wind up being amused to death, as Postman would put it, amazed to death, in other words. Back during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln spoke of a nation so unhappily distracted. That was in regard to the Civil War, but now we find ourselves distracted by the spectacle offered by our electronically mediated news, politics, and culture, and that is coming at a time when our undivided attention is needed more than ever. The third term, diversion. As Jacques Ellul explains, our divertissements divert us from any higher calling, whether religious, spiritual, ethical, or moral. Our mission is to heal the world, repair what is broken, and as Alfred Korzybski would remind us, to make progress, not only scientifically and technologically, but in human relations, in the human condition. Our choice remains the one articulated by H.G. Wells early in the 20th century between education and catastrophe, and ultimately the choice articulated by Buckminster Fuller in the mid-20th century between utopia and oblivion. Now, to turn things around, the fourth term is focus. This is the counterpart of attention. Writing, literacy, and print require focus. As McLuhan would remind us, those media train our eyes to employ a fixed point of view. They train us to focus on a near point and follow it along in linear fashion. And this extends to our thought processes, to focus on a topic, to follow a line of inquiry or argument, to shut out distractions, to concentrate. The written word, typography, and the school are focus-centered media. Attention-centered media are assaults on our ability to focus. The solitary activities of reading and writing, as well as meditation and small groups engaged in discussion, storytelling, and worship, are focus-centered as well. Focus is the deficit that defines us, not attention. Focus is where we need to place our emphasis to resist the influence and mitigate the harmful effects of the electronic media. And the fifth, the final term here, is presence. Walter Ong emphasizes this in his book, The Presence of the Word. Ong was influenced by the philosopher and theologian Martin Buber in this, particularly the I-U relationship being based on being present to one another, recognizing one another as persons and not things, not I-it. Attention-centered media want us to be audiences, whether completely passive or lost in interactive gameplay and social media likes and commenting. Presence demands true responsiveness to one another, and as Buber explains, responsibility begins with response, our ability to respond. And we need to take responsibility for what is going on all around us. Presence means actually being there, being here now, being aware, being responsive. There can be some form of presence in electronically mediated interaction. I don't want to deny that. Also in the written word, but presence mainly implies co-presence. Presence is mindfulness. It is caring for an obligation to one another. The saying favored by Ellul comes to mind here, to think globally and act locally. By way of conclusion, I would offer that focus coming to us from literacy and print, and presence coming to us from orality, offer a starting point for finding an answer to our attention-centered electronic media environment, and they offer a starting point for finding an antidote to the poison that afflicts us at this moment in history. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lance. And thank you to all speakers for the session. So we've got plenty of time for questions. So I'm just scanning the audience, see if anybody has any questions for any of our speakers. So we have a few questions. So we've got over to you, Paul. Paul, you're muted. If you could just unmute yourself. Thank you.
For once in my life, I was muted. Anyway, good to meet you, Dom. I actually have a question for Fabiola, who mentioned soft robots that can be used to explore planets. And as some of you know, I'm very interested in outer space and humans getting off this planet out into the cosmos. And so I was just wondering, everything that we know about the possibility of planets circling around other stars, everything we know about that is due to these very powerful telescopes that we've had circling our planet for like the last 20, 25 years. And so my question is, what those powerful telescopes show us, is that a map because it's an artificial representation of those planets? Or is it a territory? I mean, here when we use a telescope on planet Earth and we look at something far away, we think correctly that we're looking at a territory. It's not a map. So which do you think that is?
Oh, thank you very much, Paul. It's a good question to think about. I studied something about James Webb, and I am a lover about these things of stars and the images from space. And I know there is a mathematician thing, a creation, image making by numbers. But in the same way, well, it's a map, but in the same way it's a kind of mixing way to think about that, the reality. And I think the most important thing is not to ask if it's a map or a territory as a definition, but the relation through both of them. Well, these soft robots are made by very malleable materials to go where humanity can't go. So maybe they will took some pictures. There is no a reality picture, but well, any image is real, and in the same time that creates a kind of reality, as you know, a fiction. And I think it's a good question to think about relations and not to fix a meaning, saying, well, that robots are similar to humans and will discover the reality of Saturn or Mars. No, but if we can go there in the future, maybe with our eyes, that this is a technical tool. It's not, we can't see reality as in the philosophical way, because our perceptions creates kinds of maps. So I don't know how to answer your question, but I think this kind of robots could in the same time make us thinking about our reality, taking a look around us, and can imagine it. How can we achieve other images of the space? And this I think this makes some difference to our daily life, to take a look to our parents or cats or music, and to maybe to say, okay, this is not a map, this is not a territory, because I am imagining, but the relation that these both things, it's good. Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Perhaps we should introduce the term mapitory. Maybe that could help us out.
A new hybrid thing. Good.
Maybe we
Good.
shouldn't be introducing new words, should we, as general semanticists? Okay, Dr. Bird, you had a question?
Yeah, so Lance, I love the idea. I think it's really important for me, I think, especially to remember like the way that this shift of education has affected into the television. So thank you for going into that. When I hear at the beginning the idea of stillness and silence, being like the pinnacle of what is required for everyone to learn, immediately what comes to mind is I'm sitting here stimming with this toy because it's the way that I best listen, which is the movement that I require to best digest any material. So like my idea is, and thinking as well, another example is like from a more expansive neurodiverse idea of autistic folks and ADHD folks, we know that many times we need other stimuli to almost like be able to both have the stimulation we require to digest something. So I think this can like expand the idea of like a very otherwise universalized neurotypical perspective of what it means to be able to listen and learn and actively be present, and the way that that can be expanded to express neurodiversity and what it means to learn, but also the way that stillness and silence have been built into the educational institution as a bias. And I think that like, because it is useful to some, that has been universalized and erased many of us. So my question for you, with that said, is for those of us who live from that neurologic, the one that is more expansive, couldn't the technologies of this age not in fact be a better fit for a more neurodiverse public, especially in an age where those same biases were built into the diagnostic criteria that didn't allow us to be diagnosed to begin with and erased us through ugly laws and eugenics? And in those biases built into the media of institutions, doesn't the technology that's arrived today that does break apart those traditional ideas of expertise and traditional ideas of what it means to listen and learn offer us opportunities that could actually benefit our learning broadly and expand educational institutions, like as an opportunity from that challenge? Does that make sense?
It does. And as you may know, or maybe you don't, and I address the topic of autism specifically and the latest version was in concerning communication. One of the things that comes up, at least what I see, is that, you can see how neurodiverse individuals can play important roles in kind of oral culture, for example, where, along with diversity of all other different kinds, as long as you're part of the family, first of all, you're taken care of, but also that you offer skills that could be proved to be quite important, not the least being particularly memory skills. And that literate culture has a lot that is very conducive to, particularly a kind of autistic mindset, that, including that quiet and, kind of focus that is emphasized. And that electronic culture, now I'm not talking about specific uses of the technology, but electricity itself has been very damaging in this regard. And I do have a quote in there from, and this goes back to the 90s, and there was a discussion list online where someone who was from the a high-functioning individual with autism wrote about how everything is just such an assault, from the fluorescent light bulbs to just the constant noise and chatter, and you go to a doctor's office or any kind of waiting room, and now it's, and forget about even some old magazines being around, there's always a goddamn TV on, and there's no off switch, and you drive and there are billboards flashing at you. I mean, that so I think, what you're bringing up, Bert, it would be possible to use electronics to create a kind of, a very focused kind of atmosphere. I think of how when I was a kid, they used more mechanical devices for kids who were having trouble learning how to read. And I think it was probably had to do with dyslexia, but they would like put a mask on a page, so all you saw is one line, and they would have you follow it, and then you would move line to line, so you wouldn't be distracted. So you can obviously use the technology for those kinds of purposes and devise that, but it's very hard to just create this completely cocooned environment for individuals. So I think that on the sum of things, this is probably the worst environment for neurodiverse individuals that we've had. Yeah, and again, you think about people, and on the autism spectrum, you can kind of move from there into ADHD, because there's a connection between them, and this is a terrible environment for people with ADHD, again, because it's just like, again, there's no quiet, there's this constant distraction that's going on, in the environment. So it's very hard to get away from that. I mean, and again, you can create an individual environment where you do, but it's quite different from the kinds of living circumstances that we once inhabited. So that, I mean, that's how I would see it.
No, I hear you. I mean, my point is really just that the experience of any one person is going to be unique, because you're going to be sensory seeking or sensory avoidant, and you're going to gravitate between that. So it's like, there are those of us that genuinely need like body doubling. There are those of us that genuinely need that sensory seeking experience to listen and to learn and to actively take part.
Yeah.
So I think that that's an expansion that is necessary to explicate.
Sure. I think though a lot of the, like one of the needs is like hugging, or is, or is the, it's the touch, the physical thing, which again, this kind of media does not avail us of, and is about presence again.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful question, Dr. Bird. So it looks like we have one more question. Jesse Henshaw, over to you.
Yeah, hi. I've been studying the origin of language, and it seems to really pretty clearly come from the sort of 50,000 years before formal languages were defined, like the roots of Greek or Hebrew or the many others that are the oldest of the languages, in a period when the Homo sapien explorers from the Kenya area were exploring the whole northern continent, the Indo-European continent, giving and that they exchanged their words for things, or their sounds, more likely, is possibly, I think, very likely, the source of the illusion that there was a common language, a common Indo-European language, because the explorers met on the trail and shared what they called things, and they talked about the meanings of the things they thought to name. And so it sort of suggests a naming by pointing process that took a long time to fall together into real languages, starting probably with syllables and then at a later date becoming more complex. Anyway, so the question is, what happens to a language when it loses its contact with the physical subjects it once referred to? Which we see happening today, in the sense that there are a lot of communities that develop different meanings for the same words. They're all talking English in the United States, but there are a lot of people who don't mean anything like what others do, and so it's almost like the experience referred to in the Bible of the population of the Tower of Babel having multiplying languages that couldn't communicate, having started from a common language. And Do any of you have thoughts about that phenomenology, that we could lose our language by making up our own definitions and not referring to the root experiential meaning of life and nature by taking, creating abstract personal abstractions that we choose, like woke, a term that has wandered all over the map recently. Lots of others taken very, very seriously. Anyway, any ideas?
Anybody want to take that one on?
Well, I'll just comment, even though I wasn't a presenter. I'm not too worried about that because language evolves like everything else that we do. And I think what you're saying is correct as far as the change, but I don't see it spelling out the end of language in any manner, shape, or form. And while we're at it, I'll just throw in here that I don't think Jacques Ellul, and I know a lot of people hold him in very, very high esteem. But one of the problems with Jacques Ellul that I always point out is he's an opponent of all technology, except when he decides to use a technology like printing to get his ideas out to the world. And that seems to me, at the very least, to be inconsistent. But, this view that the world is coming to an end for one reason or another, I think is almost always very premature. And I'll just add one other thing. There are a lot more serious things, it seems to me, to worry about that are going on in this world than, the degradation of language.
Well, I guess the suggestion was that the degradation of the language was the cause of those other more serious things, because the lack of communication, like the word growth, has come to mean nothing whatsoever related to the phenomenon of growth. It's an abstraction that is universally held to be the most positive thing going on, but it's also the most disruptive in nature.
Okay, everybody. Well, so we're coming to the end of this session. We're now sort of moving into break time. Did anyone else have a question? Robert, did you have a question? Robert, you're muted.
Is it unmuted now?
You're okay.
That's good.
Can you hear me? Okay. It's another question. It's a follow-up question for Fabiola. She says at one point, Fabiola, you said that differences can't be mapped. But my follow-up question would be, how are they actually, first and foremost, apprehended? Because obviously a difference is something that is noticed, but in what form of noticing is it that that takes place? Is it in terms of bodily movements? If you're learning a skill, you have to have a sense of differences in the particular movements or mastering what it is, the task that you're engaged with. And I'm thinking here that there is a whole aspect of psychology, not just cultural psychology, but psychology that talks about affective pertinence, that things are felt as different, or a difference is felt before any other form of noticing. I wonder what you would say to such a thing as this, namely that they don't arise by trying to find the differences, but in a certain sense, the differences find us. Does that make any sense?
Thank you, Bob. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I learned to learn many things about by you, because you're great. You're a great professor, and I admire you. And what are you saying? I tried in my dissertation PhD anytime to do this media coverage and to see the differences, but indeed the similarity came before and every time, and we can't really see the differences. So what are you saying about psychology? To me, there's a very good meaning, because in during this media coverage, in one moment, I realized that some arts through these three groups that no made sense in a logical and linear way touched me, my feelings, and I started to see kind of differences through them. But it is not just a stuff of habits that the repetition shows, but escape, a drift. And I had to go to this kind of discovering how I felt that in my day life, and that was similar to them, but in a kind of way different too. And was interesting, because when I said that the difference can't be mapped, means that translations, linguistic translations and ontological ones, couldn't trace a map, a really map, showing explicitly the really differences. That is not just cultural, but it is a feeling and a kind of poetic one. Because of that, I got a notion that mapping and cartography, as says Michel Foucault and even Deleuze, about do a cartography, is different for make a mapping. And I think Thin Ingold do that, and disagree with that guy Bruno Latour, because they are concerned that mapping is different for a cartography, because a cartography is also a psychosphere stuff. And well,
Fabiola, I'm really sorry to interject, but we're sort of breaking into our break time now. We need to, so as people have done before, please do continue these conversations, these exciting conversations. But thanks to all of the speakers, and we're due for the next session to start at past. Okay. So the next session starts, that just gives us just over 5 minutes to have a quick coffee. But thank you, everyone. Okay, thank you.